Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about the power of branding in game development. Now, great games don't just happen, they're built on strong branding that resonates with players. But how do you convince a development team that brand matters just as much as gameplay? Well, in this episode, we're going to break down how branding impacts everything from marketing to player engagement, and how developers can integrate branding into their creative process without sacrificing their vision. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Hilary Goldstein. Hilary, how's it going? And thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's going well. It is a freezing time in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm glad to be here in a warm room because it is very cold outside.
You know what? Right back at you, because I am in a warm room and it's freezing here, but worse, it's freezing rain and slush and just miserable junk in the northeast of the US. So, two extremes coming together in a warm, cozy room and a fun conversation.
Sure. I'll share a warm, cozy room with you anytime.
Awesome. Well, folks, like I said, we have Hilary here. And for those of you who aren't familiar with him, he runs a consultancy, Fitted Marketing. And among many other clients, I'm going to butcher this. Is it Glee?
Guiley.
Guiley, it is. It was one or the other. Guiley Games, where they acts as, the fractional head of marketing. But in addition to that, I mean, you've been doing like brand and growth marketing, for over 2 decades, and with experience in gaming, entertainment. I mean, there's everything from you were formerly at 1047 Games, like Splitgate 2, was it Scopely
Yep.
with the WWE champions, EA games, like titles like Madden, NBA, Live Mobile, among others. I mean, you've been at this for a while and everything else. And I mean, everything else from like developing and executing like innovative full funnel marketing campaigns, specialize in life cycle marketing, community engagement, player acquisition. I mean, and wait a minute, you've even published like comic book writer and you're your former journalist too, right?
Yeah, most people know me because I used to be the editor-in-chief of a site called IGN.com long, long ago. And then, I left that job to go into the publishing side. And in my time off between those things, I was like, I've always wanted to make a comic. And so I self-published, well, no, actually I had publishers. I published 2 comic books. I used Kickstarter to crowdfund it. But yeah, and then I've got some other comic book stuff that I have in the pipeline too. So it's just a fun time. I like to be creative, man.
Absolutely. And what better place to be creative than with actual things that are what most of us would call creative, and then on the marketing side creative, because that one can be, I know, a little nuanced and challenging, but it still has its own creativity there. And I know we're going to get into some of that in a minute, but before we do, such a cool and interesting background. But you know what? I would like to get to know you a little bit more, and I'm sure our listeners would too. And we're going to do that with the Q Box round. And, folks, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's just a series of quick random questions I prepared here for Hilary today. So, Hilary, are you ready for the Q Box round?
Hit me.
All right. What's one habit you have that has contributed to your success?
Yeah, biggest one. And it doesn't matter what your discipline is or even what industry you're in, but I just always ask people how I can help. So I just make that a part of my regular conversation because you'd be surprised how many people need help. And when you approach anything with a sense of like, oh, I need something from you, right? You're going to oftentimes meet resistance or people are going to be annoyed. But, if you can state, these are the things I'm trying to achieve. What are you trying to achieve? Well, how can we help each other what can I do for you? And sometimes people are gonna be like, well, unless you're an engineer, you can't do anything for me. That's okay. At least you asked. But to me, that's always been in business and personal life, trying to understand, well, what can I do for you has helped me throughout my career.
Oh, I absolutely love that one. And plus, I would say that's probably one of, if not the, like, best networking tips out there, I would say, right? Like, how,
Yeah.
because it opens up to so much more. Like, you're showing you care about people, and then next time they remember you, they're like, wow, that guy thought about me. That person thought, I love it. I love it. Such a good one there. All right. Next is, what's your favorite, most helpful mobile app?
This is going to be the most obnoxious marketing thing that I could say, but it is LinkedIn. And the reason why is like I've been fortunate to never have to like sell myself to people at all. But the industry is constantly moving. There's so many games that come out, and there's so many things that different marketers do that like it is collected all in LinkedIn, right? If I want to know what's the most important thing people are talking about games today, I go in my LinkedIn feed because somebody has posted a thought, like shared an article, shared some data, but also on top of that, right? I get in touch. It's like Facebook used to be, right? This is how you kept in touch with people you knew in high school when you get older. Well, it's people you worked with or interacted with in business. You get to understand where they are in the world, where they're working, because someday you might need their help. You might find out that they need your help and you can reach out. But again, it's a conversation tool. It's not just that, but it really does tell you everything. And then I think the last part is, we're always looking as marketers for examples of, hey, what's something cool somebody did, especially on, the low cost side. And you're going to see it all because every marketer who does anything, they share that on LinkedIn, right? Sometimes the results, but always like, oh, we did this cool thing, right? And so it helps you get ideas. And then, especially if you maintain relationships. If I saw, Civ 7, they just had like a history rap battle thing, right? Between Charlemagne and Napoleon. I was like, that's cool. I would never have seen that if I wasn't on LinkedIn. But also, what if one day I have an idea where I'm like, oh man, we could use a rap battle to do this. I know the person who ran that campaign to make
Yeah.
that happen. I can reach out to them and just be like, hey, do you have like a contact? Like, what was that like? What good or bad was your experience? So, like, again, LinkedIn is just the ultimate in terms of networking. Again, you don't have to be doing cold call pitches to people in their LinkedIn, but it is the first thing I check actually every day. And I do check it like probably at least 5 times a day during breaks to see what's going on, what's going on with people.
That's such a good point too, because it's like I think, if we looked at real quick how some of us might view LinkedIn in the past, it was like, strictly professional and everything else. But it's so much more fluid now. It is really adapted
Yeah.
and come along. It is more like a social network, but still, obviously professional to an extent, but it's definitely a lot more, more casual than what it may have been in the past. And yeah, I've seen it adapt and change. And I think one thing I want to add on there, because I thought all the stuff you shared was great, was simply because I know some of us, we might actually have like full-time jobs and doing games on the side. So it's like, oh, there's that conflict there, which I was in for a bit. Like, I don't want to let my business or the company I'm working
Yeah.
for know. There's other strategies and ways to get around it. But even just hanging out, it makes a world of a difference. So good one right there. And I know you will call out to this because you kind of mentioned it a moment ago. But what game are you playing now?
Yeah, so Civ 7 just came out, and I'm a big Civ fan. I was really fortunate that Civ 5 came out when I was on like a 3-month paternity leave, and I was just like, baby, you're going to take a nap, and daddy's going to play Civ 5 for like 3 hours. So thanks for the well timed birth to my firstborn. And then anything my kids want to play, my kids are like big into games, and but they need a lot of help sometimes. So pretty much they just rule the world. And if you've played games with people under 10, like us old people, we're like, I'm going to play and beat this game, and you're going to play. I'm going to just play and play and play. Kids are like, okay, I'm going to play this game for 25 minutes, and then I'm going to switch and reload to a different game. And then I'm going to want to restart this game over. So I'm just trapped in the gravity of whatever they want to do. So I've played through Astrobot probably 5 times,
Yep.
100% of it, because my kids keep wanting to restart it and see the process go through. So yeah, it's fun, but it's different than certainly my experience when I was a kid, when my parents were like,
Oh yeah.
we're never going to spend any money to get you a game ever. And that's what got me to get a job when I was 10 years old.
Uh, All right, I'm gonna have two digression moments here, folks. One was, do you ever go back to playing like NES games at all and being like, how the hell did I play this as a kid? Because that I do that, and
Oh,
I thank God for Rewind.
well, yeah. I mean, I will say I've shown my kids some games where I'm like, oh yeah, this is like one of the harder games I played when I was a kid, or a game I loved, and I can't get past the first level anymore. And I'm like, I don't even understand how like my
Yeah.
reaction time used to be when I was a kid. I didn't
Oh,
understand.
I
I'll say
okay.
I'll say the interesting thing is though is like my kids appreciate like high fidelity graphics, but they don't really care. So you can show them an 8-bit game and they're just like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
Like it's interesting. They're not at all like the graphics don't matter to them very much.
You know, I
But man, yeah.
I would say I think it's in a way it might be a core thing in terms of, hey, if that mechanic and central loop and everything is still fun, that's really what carries the
Yeah.
weight. And the last thing, and then we'll move right on, folks. I apologize, but I really want to know because Hillary opened up something here. Have you ever tried to consider, and maybe now they're too old, but like games like PJ Masks and stuff? The PJ Mask, I think, was a platform or something. Because
Oh, we play all of those. So my kids are 8, 6, and 4.
okay,
Perfectly timed,
yes,
all of them. And the 4-year-old's actually the best one at games, which is pretty wild. But any licensed game they're always into. So any Barbie game, PJ Masks, like there's a Dogman game that just came out and they love Dogman. And so like yeah, they will play any of those. A lot of those are also on their iPads, which is kind of nice. But yeah, they pretty much burn through
wow.
like a ton of those types of games.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my kids too, and the reason why I ask about the PJ Masks one is because I was thinking about picking it up for I was at a used
Ah.
video game store, and I was talking to the owner there, and he's like, "Don't." And apparently, that this is a problem with all these like younger kid IP license things, well known. He's like, basically, I had numerous accounts of parents getting that game for their kids and creating a situation where the kids couldn't figure out the puzzles and therefore the
Oh yeah.
parents had to, but then because of the poor like intuitive design, or it wasn't as intuitive or designed that well or whatever, then the parents are getting frustrated, so then the kids are now yelling at the parents and vice versa because of this experience. So that's why I was
Yeah,
curious.
I live that life, but I'll say as a grown-up gamer, it's the easiest way to interact with your kids. So my wife's like,
Yeah.
I want a day off because my wife is a stay-at-home mom. She's like, I want a day off. Like, do you mind? And I'm like, I mean, we're just gonna play video games for 6 hours, so sure. Like, take all the time you want. This is super easy
That's awesome.
parenting. But we learn to play together. So they used to be very much like that, like you don't know what you're doing, blah blah blah. But now they've kind of come around to like, oh, we're all actually trying to work it out. So if anything, they're more annoying in that they're constantly throwing out solutions and it's like
Mm.
too much input, and you're
Yeah,
just like, can you just give me 2 seconds to look
too
and
much.
think? Yeah, and then kids are super impulsive, so
Yep,
any
yep.
game that has collectibles or whatever, they just run forward and you're like, oh, there's something to the left. So that always drives me
Nope, don't
crazy
care.
and I drive them crazy with like, can you just stop and just pan the camera to the left and like you'll see there's a thing there
Oh
because
man.
they just go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, sorry. I saw a moment. I don't get to talk to many dads with these situations, and I don't know. Maybe I should form a group or something. So I'm sorry. Hillary amused me at all of your expenses. So let's get right back to the conversation here, folks, and which I led in with the intro of kind of the power of branding in game development, right? Because let's face it, like when we're talking about branding and everything else, I don't know, sometimes it can kind of be like a big lofty idea, corporate. I don't know, we probably have our own labels and feelings and emotions attached to it. But I mean, there's definitely something going on there. And even like, prior, pre-conversation here a few weeks ago when I was talking to Hilary, this is like one of the areas that we dove into a little bit, and lots of interesting stuff and why we're here today. So to kick things off, I mean, Hillary, let's just straight out ask, like, why do you think branding is often overlooked by development teams? Like, what's the reason behind this?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, I think the first thing is people don't understand it, and then it seems like a scary expense because you'll see a lot of agencies out there that would offer to build your brand for you, and they'll cost a ton of money, and indie games don't have all this money, and it's like, what's the value in it? So not understanding the value of or even understanding what brand is, why do we need it? Marketing, and this is not just indies. Like I've worked at big companies like EA and stuff. And marketing is often an afterthought, right? You're focused on make this product. That's the important thing, which obviously the product is most important. But it's like kind of like, okay, now we need somebody to like run ads or something. And marketing can do a lot more for you if it's integrated. And like, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's a lot of subpar marketers out there. I mean, just like there's a lot of subpar developers also, right? There are people who want to be in the industry, but maybe they're not that great at what they do. And so sometimes people just have a bad experience
Mm.
with a marketer that is the like slick NBA, I'm going to wear a tie and all this kind of stuff. And like the glossier salesman person that isn't going to work well with a small indie team. And then people get turned off, or that's their image of what
Yeah.
marketing is. So yeah, I mean, I think that's all valid stuff of why somebody who maybe it's the first time making a game wouldn't really understand what brand even is or does.
Yeah, and you know what? Those those perceptions and stuff are legit. I've worked with many clients before, and some very specifically have called out to those bad experiences, and it's not universal to them. I mean, it's not it's a relatively a universal thing, and because of that, it puts that bad taste in it. It takes so much longer to gain trust about whatever. So it's a real thing. So in light of that, I mean, I want to get into more about kind of the role that branding has in games, especially studios, the development process. So just for some additional context here, how would you define brand as it relates to game development?
Sure. I mean, brand is kind of like the kind of all-encompassing perception that an audience has towards a game or a developer or even a publisher, right? So the best way that I can explain that is if you saw a new Elden Rings game, right, or you just saw FromSoft is making a new game and you saw one image of it, you pretty much know what you're gonna get, right? Even if it's a new brand, like FromSoft, and I've been playing their games for like 20 years or whatever. They're always like hard, challenging games, usually in like a very dark world, right? And now they have much more immersion, but you instantly understand what they will bring and the type of game they're gonna make. And so that is brand, right? So you don't have to know anything about the product. I just say they're going to announce a new game. You're like, you've already kind of understood a basic idea of what it will be. That is the power of brand. It lives and it can exist outside of the product to set an expectation for you.
Yeah, no, that's a great example, and it's funny as you were sharing that, I was thinking of some more of my own. Like one, it's funny whenever I work with clients, sometimes I ask a question, who do you try to emulate that's out there and well known and things like that. And I would say probably one of the number one answers that pops up is like Supergiant, right? And immediately by
Yeah.
saying Supergiant, I'm sure most of you already have this idea of what you expect. Like if you're a fan, you have even more intuition and deeper understanding of what they represent. Everything from their games to how they represent themselves as a company, how they really cater to their audience and fans. So many things going on there. And then another really funny one. Well, funny story kind of is not too long ago, I was doing a project. I was building a shed and I called up my, local, their lawn care specialist. They, deliver, crushed stone, which I was getting from him. And the owner's usually the driver, and he's a big, big gamer. So I knew for a last delivery I had, he was talking about, what was it, Space Marines and stuff. And I started asking him two questions about them and just Saber in general. And my goodness, like this guy, like was amazing what things he called out about the brand, how he loved them, how they represent themselves, how they treat players. Like, and you wouldn't think of it just from the outside because he's just simply this guy who owns a lawn care business. But here he is, like calling out all these things. And I was like,
Yeah.
I know Saber, I know people who work there, and I never even thought it to this point that this guy is detailing these things. And this is just a gamer.
That's
Right.
cool. Yeah.
But
That's
but
that's super cool.
yeah, but
Yeah.
so to put into context, folks, I mean, great definition, Hillary, in terms of like what that is, but there's power behind this, huh?
There is like a if I just said right now, da 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 da, you everybody in your audience knows exactly. But I'm not saying French fries, Big Mac, any of that
Right.
stuff, right? It's just a mnemonic like thing, right? It's a little audio earworm, but you instantly know what it is. That is brand.
So we may have gotten into this a little bit, and maybe jingles won't be part of this, but like I'm
Yeah.
curious, like what would you say are some key elements of a strong brand, and how do they, extend beyond just logos, visuals, and even little jingles?
Sure thing. Well, I mean, first and foremost, right, brand starts with an understanding of your audience and their motivations, which for player motivations, there's a lot of tools for understanding this, but it's what drives you to play, not just games in general, but specific types of games, right? And so understanding the things that drive people then are the core foundation of, well, how should we be communicating our game that is going to speak to the motivational needs of people who are looking for something? And then, brand is consistent and effective messaging. I think the most key thing that people, I think, generally understand about brand is, you have a set of brand colors, tone, everything like that. And that having that consistent in the game and everything that you do in marketing, right, allow in your storefront, et cetera, allows you to go, okay, I can identify. And the best, if you ever want to understand how that works, you just look at Valorant. That's like the S tier of brand clarity and consistency. You can look at any asset that is Valorant, and League of Legends is not the same, even though they're both by Riot. But Valorant, they made a specific effort, I think, and like that is like the most well communicated brand identity that I've seen like visually. And then you work on market positioning versus competitors. So you have to understand all the competitors. What do they offer? What motivations do they key in on? What are the areas where they might have a weakness? And then where do you sit within that for your product? Because again, this all informs how are you going to actually focus your message to something that puts you separate from everybody else in the market. Because the hardest thing and the most important thing is like what makes you different. And I've worked on games that, like, to be real, aren't that different from everyone else. And it's hard to find unique selling points, but you have to find that place within the market that you can own and speak to. And then, really getting to the unique selling points. And sometimes those are features which we gravitate towards that are unique, but sometimes it might just be thematic or something about social systems or whatever it is. And then, last thing is, and this is my experience with almost every developer, is developers or people outside of marketing, brand marketing, tend to be very literal or functional, right? So they say, our game does XYZ, like we need to tell in every trailer the XYZ of our game, but brand is really about more something evocative. So how do we represent that in the product? So if you have a very like male focused, mature game that might be gritty and bloody and everything like that, you could, of course, have a trailer that's like lots of blood and blah, 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 right? But what you really want to do is say, okay, how do we represent that? And the key art and the name and the colors and the style and the brand. And you can look at God of War as an example. Like God of War can do these visuals. And of course, it's a long running brand, so you have an expectation of what it is. But it does say a lot about who it is and what it represents and everything that they do. And so you kind of get like, okay, I can look at one thing and go, yeah, my kids can't play this game yet. And again, Elden Rings is another great example where they're not hero focused. If you look at the Elden Ring key art, it's like a silhouetted character on a knee driving a sword into the ground, and they're small where most people would have them in focus and you could see their face or whatever. But it is a setting of what the world and the expectation is of the product, and that is all informed by what you're trying to say through the brand.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Like, dude, I hate to like pull from other podcasters I listen to, but so many value bombs there. No,
Thanks.
seriously, like so many great things. I mean, I was making some quick notes just to kind of like, summarize on the key points there. But man, when it really comes to, understanding those key elements, you nailed it when you said understanding the audience and their motivations. Because it's like, you were leading in with the concepts of, yeah, there's the gameplay, there's the mechanics, those features, all those things are important. But then what else? How are you going to get deeper? How are you going to better understand those motivations and needs? And like, some ways I look at it is like, hey, what's the pain? What fulfills them in terms of their experiences with the games, or even what are the themes going on? You called out to that. So what are the themes? Are there themes going on that relates to other personal interests and stuff? Like, hey, maybe people who like crafting, there's some correlation or to, DIY projects or making stuff or whatever, right? It could carry it out. And if you know these motivations and drives, boom, you could do that much more. And then that last one you said, being evocative. because and this is the tricky part, of course, but then it's like being direct, but also having your messaging and communication be open to interpretation. Because if you're too literal, sometimes the next thing you know, you're like, you could miss the boat. But if you're creating mystique or someone curiosity about these things, that's when people are like, all right, you got my attention. I have an idea, but I want more. So man, all great things that you just delivered there and stuff. And it's really interesting when we start talking about it this way, right? And we start thinking about it more like and I'm hope maybe people listening today are starting to kind of get ideas bubbling up and how the different ways to look at things. But brand goes so much deeper than I think we really realize. And as we start going through these exercises and even potentially like kind of like what we just did and sharing just a moment ago, how would you say, like, if someone's listening today thinking about this, trying to do what we're doing today on their own with their team, whoever, what other things though could come from this work, right? Like, essentially, how does brand impact things like marketing, like community building, let's say even whether it's long-term engagement or maybe even the development process? How does brand now impact everything else that we're trying to do as a studio?
Yeah, I mean, good branding really seeps into everything, including the product. So when you build out the voice for the brand, right? It's like everything you do with the community on social, but also even how the game might communicate with the players, the characters, and how they're represented. It really is the understanding of it. Like if you think about things that just instinctually at this point in games. So if I told you there was a new Mario game coming out, like you kind of like, and they've done a bunch of different genres in Mario games, but there are certain things that you just instantly understand. There's also ways that Mario can and can't communicate right with you, but those things also are meant to be consistent with you. So it really is like drips into kind of everything. And the way that I've always expressed it to people is, okay, if and this is not my original idea, I believe this might have been Seth Godin, but like if I told you today that Nike was announcing that they were going to make a series of gyms across America, right? You don't see anything else. It's just that one sentence. Like you probably can have a general idea of like what that might look like, what that might be like, how that might differ from like a Planet Fitness or some other gym. And that is because Nike itself has established it so well. So what we want to try to achieve, and even in a single product of a game, is that if I know it and understand that very well, like when future things come out, DLC, whatever it is, and when I talk about the game, I'm able to speak to it in a way that is just very consistent, and I gain kind of more of a potentially an emotional attachment. Because the other thing to recognize about brand is like it is a reflection of the person playing it. So if I'm a huge Dungeons and Dragons fan, right? For example, right, and I told you that the brand Dungeons and Dragons and me aligning with it, right? I have a T-shirt or a tattoo or whatever it is, right? That tells you something about me, and the fact that I'm adopting that in some way, like not that I did, but like let's say I named my kid after Tiamat or something like that, famous dragon in Dungeons and Dragons. Like that level of attachment is your brand is part of who I am, part of my personal identity, and when you can get that deep, right, then people will follow and trust you and evangelize you wherever you go. And that is the power of Apple, I think, over Microsoft, or certainly just PCs in general, is just that sense of like, it started as like, the Apple cult. Apple's most famous commercial, I don't know if you know, like it was in 1984.
Yeah, I
It
think
was
that's right.
based on 1984.
Yeah.
And it was just like a bunch of people, at PCs basically all like uniform and doing the same thing. And one person just gets up and throws a hammer at that big brother on the screen. And they're saying it's been the same forever, right? Be different or think different, whatever it is. And that is, even though Apple is massive now, it's still this sense of like, there's a Mac user versus a PC user instantly says something about who you are, and people will die for like their Macs, right? Over having to use a PC. That is so little about functionality and so much about how it seeps into your identity. And you want to do that for your game too.
Yeah. You know what? One thing that you said, all great points, but one thing you said a little bit not too long ago, and I wrote this down because I loved it. This is great. You calling out to saying that, and this obviously ties into brand too, but in particular, you said a game is a reflection of the person playing it. Like how impactful, how powerful is that, right? Because and I think that's really important that you called out to that, because I think a lot of the times and understandably so, we get so tunnel vision and focused on what we're doing, and then everything becomes very specific or even potentially transactional. Like, oh, wish list, oh, this is it fun, and is it because of this happening in the game, right? But we often, I don't think, also consider that statement you made, which I think rings very, very true, which is, that the games that we make is a reflection of the people playing it. And in a way too, as creators, though, those games are reflections of us too. So there's a lot of
Sure.
cool things that we're tying into here that isn't necessarily really, detailed and focused on, let's say, objective based thinking. It can be a little bit more subliminal or even subjective, and that gets into some gray areas. But I think we're doing a good job, at least, at identifying, these connections that can be made, and how impactful they really are.
Yeah. Agreed.
So, in light of that, though, I know that, hey, Andrew, Hilary, you guys are out there, and maybe so. So, and in light
Sure.
of that, let's say context, what would you say are some common objections that developers have when it comes to branding this idea and concept? And in particular, though, how do you go about addressing them? Because I know this can be kind of challenging for people who see things one way and others that don't. Though there's still, let's say, validity behind it, but getting on the same page is also important.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is, developers know what their product is, right? And so they don't want to, especially because, again, I've mentioned marketing often gets brought in very late in the process. So a lot of stuff's built. So they don't want, people are going to say, hey, like, we can't change who we are based on whatever you're coming up with, which is fair. That's why you want to understand the audience and these things in the pre-production phase. So part of it is just like, we know it, we don't need somebody else to tell it. You go market, we want you to be separate. So that's a big objection, right? Again, we talked about how people don't understand how brand kind of reflects. I think a lot of developers I've met like think of it as, okay, you're going to go get some like Shroud to go stream the game, and you're going to do some paid media ads, and you're going to basically have PR try to get us, on the cover of PC Gamer or whatever it is. And that's all they think of marketing, which is more of the tactical side. They don't see the other piece, which we talked about. People think it's like a bunch of hooey, because I think sometimes a lot of times when I've learned about brand from other people, they don't speak about it in practical ways. Generally, when I work with developers and we run like even like at offsites, we just have fun workshops. The way that I do it is they convince themselves that brand matters, and that's by just asking the group a series of different questions, right? And you get those down, and they start to understand that there's a motivation behind what you do. So as an example, as at an offsite where the next morning they were trying to get people to come and do a polar plunge, right? And so one of the questions on there was just like, why would somebody do a polar plunge, right? This has nothing to do with games, right? But why do the polar plunge? Like, you're not getting a reward from it, so why? You're not getting paid to do it. You're not required. Why would you do that? And then people start talking about stuff, and you just keep pushing them into the real motivations, and you start to see like some of it is just, hey, I want to be along to be part of the group. Well, guess what? That is a massive part of social games. And like, why is it so hard to pull people away from Fortnite? I've talked to a lot of kids in research studies and panels, and they don't like Fortnite, but they always play Fortnite because I play with this group of friends, and we've been playing Fortnite for like ever. And I can't break from that. I can take breaks to play other games, but I can't leave that social system, right? That's my identity. And so social pressure is a huge part of why we play social games. As they start to see this stuff, some of it's for status, right? Only 5% of the people are going to go to this polar plunge, right? But I got to be the person that everybody sees in the morning who's like dripping and like shivering because I did this, the status symbol, right? Like I did this thing. Some of it is like, I want to push myself, test myself. Could I do this? Maybe last year I was afraid to do it, and this year I've committed myself to doing it. But all of those things are related to a polar plunge, but also you can tie back to the reasons why somebody plays the game. And then as people start to drive the real connection of like, why would I choose to pay for a cosmetic that doesn't have any effect in a game, right? I'm playing a shooter. It has no pay to win effect. It's just cosmetic. And it's a first person shooter where I can't even see the gun really, right? But I'm paying for this thing. Why do you do that? And when people start to understand, why would I pay $15 for this? Why would anybody pay $15? Then you start to see the connection between all this brand hoo ha and like actually what drives stuff. Because then you can start to make the connection of like, wait, if I think about and understand why people do things and the brand behind it, then it might influence the type of things we make for cosmetics, the way that we would sell cosmetics in our store, how we would speak about them. Does that stuff make a difference? And so I think the biggest thing is that most marketers don't talk in practical ways. They just kind of talk in this ephemeral idea of brand. But when you are very concrete with that, people can make the connections and go, oh, all these things motivate me. And now I kind of understand how those would motivate other people. And then how do we utilize that tool to, well, essentially make more money?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But and I want to go off of what you just said there, essentially to make more money. But here's the thing: you're making money in a way that better serves the audience. So it's like
Sure.
a win-win. And the only reason I'm calling out to that, because sometimes I know some people think like, oh, well, I don't want to be, if I adapt that monetization model, it might be sleazy or whatever because I see so and so do it and I'm not a fan of how they implemented it. That's fine if you're not a fan of that, but just you can't like damn the model because of how someone else approached it. But if you approach it in an ethical way that's also serving that player base, and if you thinking in these terms like you just outlined in terms of these are people that want to be, it's their identity, that this is a reason why they're
Yeah.
purchasing these things that have no real in-game value other than to how they're representing themselves and how they feel emotionally. Then you're doing them a service by doing that too, and by doing that they are rewarding you too because you're giving more of what they want and need, and then it goes right back to, and now you're able to monetize on that. And it's just a very like it becomes like a symbiotic type thing, and there's lots of other different ways that can be done. But that's why I want to call it to that point there too, because sometimes we think like, oh, this is sleazy, we shouldn't, I don't like that model. It's like, no, like think of it differently. It doesn't, not to say you have to do those things, but it's just a
Yeah.
different way to look at it.
Yeah. And I'll derail your podcast slightly for another
Let's do
example. And
it.
this is more specifically a development example of how marketing stuff can help development team and like especially in retention. So I worked on mobile casino products, and so these are games where right you're playing different slot machines. A lot of the times they're licensed from like real slots, but you can't earn any money. So you pay money right to buy virtual coins. Then you spend them all like it's not even gambling because you can't win anything back, right? So I took the job because I was fascinated like why, because some people spend $20,000 a
Oh
year
yeah.
on this stuff, right? Or more. And I just want to understand why would you, I can understand why I put money into a game where I feel like I get something like I'm beating a boss, I'm getting better skill. This is so random. And it took a while, but the end result is realistically people pay to stay. So in real slot machines and on your phone, people get into a zone, right? So they just keep spinning. It basically, the whole world kind of disappears around them and they're just in a spot, which I think we can all experience. Like Tetris is a great example too. I think people can get like in a zone in Tetris, right? Where they don't experience the world for a while. And people are paying to buy coins to extend the zone, right? They want to stay in that zone. So one thing that you can then think of as a developer, right? If you are making a mobile casino game, you might think, what are the things happening in my game that disrupt the zone, right? So obviously I want to make more money by helping people spend to stay in the zone, but are we putting in a bunch of features or other things that pop up, like maybe it's intrusive ads or whatever, that actually break the flow for somebody, which would make them leave the game, right? And once you know what you're trying to look for, it's very easy then to identify in your product the points of like, oh, this is why our retention like gets bad. It's because people hit this one thing and it disrupts their flow. And we know now the number one motivator of people spending and playing these games for a long time is the flow. So, and that has nothing to do with like how we market it, but that is a discovery that comes through brand research that then impacts development.
I love that you just made that point too. And I'll call out to this. There's no like affiliate links or anything like this, folks. But what you called out to reminded me of a book called Hooked: How to Build Habit Forming Products by Nir Eyal. He wasn't, I don't know if he still is, but he was like a consultant or at least advisor to some companies in the gaming industry as well, and has done lots of other things. I can't remember his other things, but that book primarily looks at social media networks and platforms and things like that. However, similar concepts that you're talking about there. And it's very fascinating and interesting because that's the thing. It's like, I mean, I was laughing when you were like, people are paying money to play slot machines they can't win. And technically it's not gambling, but these apps are still making money. But the thing is, and that's sometimes where it might get into like, hey, are these ethical choices or not in terms of game
Sure.
design and stuff? But the important thing is to know there are different types of motivations behind decisions people make, behind why they want to have those types of experiences, whether we view it as bad or not. The point is they are there. We're humans. There's certain ways we're wired. And if you can understand that in powerful and meaningful ways, especially like what we're mostly talking about here and creating identities for people, then there's just so many opportunities out there. So wanted to call out that book. If you're interested, I'll drop a link. It's an interesting one. It's not really game related, but it can open up some cool ideas. We talked a bit about a moment there, some of the, let's say, more psychological, really detailed elements, like just brushed it, right? But I'm curious too, because this is something I know that comes up and probably sometimes people have may struggle with too a little bit, but like in terms of these ideas and everything else, what kind of a role does, let's say, storytelling play in building a strong brand identity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it plays a lot. Even if you have, again, Tetris is a good example where, puzzle games oftentimes don't have like an actual story. I think when people hear story, they're like, oh, narrative. And I'm like, I don't have a bunch of people talking or popping up like stuff on my screen. I have like a lore or anything like that. You don't need any of that. If you think about it, there's no Blotcher, right? Massive hit made by one person last year and just fused poker with a roguelike game setting and sold I think 5 million copies or something like that on Steam. And that game has technically no narrative as a purpose, but the way that you build out your marketing is still through the story that you are telling the player, right? Sometimes that is a journey you're going to take them on a campaign. So let's say we were going to do a 6-month campaign from announcement to launch of a game, right? We don't want to just keep saying the same thing over and over again, right? We want to build on that journey that somebody is going through. And same thing with your brand, right? You know that there's an initial touch point, whether that's a trailer, an image, whatever it is, the first message, that is the first thing that people see or know about your game. It's got to say something. But then the deeper they progress along, right, you want to give them more and more depth and understanding, the more connected they are. And so how do we breadcrumb that along the path? What does that path even look like? Where is the end game? Which ultimately we want them to install the game, right? Where does that lead you to? All that stuff comes through brand marketing. Yeah, and then just know it's not just the story of your game, right? It's also where does the customer fit along that way. So like a good example is we mentioned Fortnite earlier, right? And how many games struggle against beating Fortnite and pulling people away, which I think is almost impossible at this point because there's so much time, money, social investment in it.
Yeah.
But people who play Fortnite they're not looking for another shooter that's going to remove Fortnite and replace them. I think that's why a lot of these live service shooters don't really last more than a couple of months. But they are looking for other experiences. So let's say you're making an indie game that's a 5-hour experience and maybe it's a shooter, something you, for whatever reason, it appeals to, would appeal to a Fortnite player. Your story is about the customer story is not, I'm looking for something to take away Fortnite. Yours is, I need something to just take a break that is not going to absorb a lot of my time. And so actually, counterintuitive, right? Your message is not, usually people want to say like, this is how much value you get out of the game. This is how much you're going to get to play it. Like you might want to present your game as something that is digestible, beat it in a weekend, right? Something short and sweet that isn't going to like own and take a lot of your time. Like that is surprisingly what a lot of people who are invested in live service games actually are looking for. And so it's understanding the player's own narrative and then how does your product sort of fit into that. And if you can somehow fuse those two into like the right story and message, then you have the best shot you can at being successful.
Yeah, I really appreciate that clarification there too, because again, when we're thinking of let's this strong brand identity, we may look at it or approach it as like, okay, how are we going to present ourselves? How am I going to showcase this? Right. But then what you're saying and some of the examples right on in saying it can be a little bit intuitive, but really it's coming down to a point of, how is this going to impact the player? What does their journey look like when they're coming to experience, my game? And because if you think of it, the journey itself, as you were calling out too, the goal obviously is to get them playing the game and loving it, right? Make a game creates a great experience. But when does that happen? At the very end. So how else can we like build up this experience? How else can we build up everything else about the game prior to? I mean, and this is an ongoing thing that we talk about with discoverability and how to get noticed and all these other things. Well, what you just said was, basically summarize that. It's like it's not so much about what you're trying to do, what those features, and let's say it could be a mashup of genres because there's an opportunity there. Great, those are all helpful things, but at the end of the day, it's the players that kind of make the calls, and if you're not, doing things in a manner or way that's kind of helping them understand or relate or resonate on their journey, then that could be just make that more challenging, create more friction, and all these other things. So I love
Sure.
that you call that out because it's one of the things, at least from my perspective, I see happening regularly where and again, it's by no fault to anybody, is when you're thinking in this mindset like, oh, what do I have to do? You're so ingrained to this, naturally you're going to do it. I do it all the time. I can't imagine any human that doesn't, right? So
Yeah.
it's like getting in, shifting mindset, getting outside of that box essentially, and thinking about what is it really going to mean to this audience? Their, like you said, their motivations, their drives, and all these other things, because that's is what's going to help shape your brand. Even though it's now almost your, it's not your audience's brand, but it's again, like you said, it seems intuitive, but it does make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in a, I think that's well said. We live in an environment now where there's a lot more of a shared sort of ownership. So,
Mm,
it really isn't, especially on any live service product, but really even with indies, right? A lot of times you want to understand your team. And we got a team of 10 people and this was our dream and this is how it came about. Like people invest sometimes in just the story. Like I mentioned Balatro, but I think part of its success is when you hear these first you see that it's blowing up on Steam, you're like, what is this game? And then when people hear like one guy made this game and did everything, I think for a lot of people are like, I want to support that. Like when people are in the indie scene, they want to support it. And that means understanding the developers. And a lot of times people want to feel like a sense of ownership of the thing that they support and love. So it is got to have some more of a two-way street than like sort of a larger publisher tends to be, very at arm's length of like, we're giving you this thing and then you're going to enjoy the thing and we'll make whatever choices we want, which causes friction is one of my favorite words in marketing, causes a lot of friction.
yep.
But on the indie scene, like you really want to bring people in, and the only way people are going to feel brought in is if you're making it feel more like Mad Libs and not just story time, right? Where it's like, okay, give me your input and like, this is how it's going to affect our story. I think that stuff is very powerful.
Oh yeah, I mean that sense of ownership and not direct obviously is important. I mean, just very quick example, and then we're gonna move on because I know we're coming on time here. I mean, look at GameStop. Remember that whole thing, like right?
Yeah.
I mean, but if I watched some documentaries on Netflix about it because I was interested, but the number one reason why like there's so much of a rally and stuff, it wasn't so much so, at least from the interviews they conducted, of the opportunity that was there. It was more of a bigger, much bigger concept and idea that really resonated with people and got down to their core. Like, I grew up with GameStop. I don't like what's happening. And yes, I have been following like, market trends and trading and things like that. And well, I want to rally with the rest of my community, like people like me and everything. Like that's what I think it was one of the defining factors and why that changed. It wasn't simply because there's so many things. It's like they were the underdog, like you're talking about with indies and stuff. There's so many things going on. And just another quick, somewhat related example of, it comes down to drives more than, features. I mean, features are helpful, but there's so much more to this than anything else. All right. Last question here as we get ready to
Yeah.
close. I'm just curious though, because in light of everything talked about, we talked a little bit about getting on the same page. How would you say like developers and marketers, can work together more effectively on this idea to ensure that, their games brand is clear and compelling? Because one thing I hate is silos. So I love to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, and I think siloing is one of the biggest challenges you face, especially the larger the organization gets. But it is be collaborative. If you just think about how do you feel involved and work with other people, it's if you come in and you say, "Hey, I'm the marketer, and this is what it's going to be." So you've got to have some give and take and some leeway because this is the product that somebody or several people are making, right? So they have an investment and an understanding of it that's deeper than yours can ever be about it as a marketer. And so you've got to bring them into the fold. And so that is creating collaborative sessions, right? Letting them give feedback, asking them questions early on of like, how do you perceive the game? How would you explain in one sentence, explain your game to somebody else? All those kind of things, right, should influence what you're delivering to them. So it's just collaboration is obviously huge and being interactive, right, and asking questions. I'm a big believer in asking questions. Just let people talk their way through it. And they'll also realize the stuff they don't know. A lot of people who make games could not describe their game in one sentence, but that's ultimately the job of marketing is to figure out
Yeah.
what is the one 5 words or whatever that tells you a game. But them even realizing they can't summarize it in that way helps because then they go, wait, I actually need your help there. And then the other thing is really is just do it. So I've had it before where like I have a client right now that I won't name, but first day that I came in there and I really came in there to help them on the brand side because a friend of mine was focused on other parts of marketing and he needed the assist. And the first meeting they ever said was like, look, I don't care about any of this brand crap. Like these are the things that I care about. You guys do whatever you want, but this is what I care about. And I told my buddy, like, trust me, I'm just gonna do it. And then I'm gonna understand the competitors, the product, the market. I'm gonna present something casually to them. And I promise you, the things that I will show them, they will change their tune immediately and be like, oh, that's what we've been trying to say. And sure enough, week later, we're just having a very casual conversation. I go through some stuff. I have some specific ways I build out like the persona of a brand itself, and immediately was like, oh, that's everything we've been talking about internally. And then I read a paragraph that's just like, here's the description of the persona of what this brand is of the product you're trying to make. And the guy was like, I got goosebumps the entire time, right? And that's it because they haven't seen it done, they're like, what's the point? But then when you're able to say, I took all of these ideas and thinking in the context of the market and the context of the audience we're trying to hit, and I can summarize it in a way where you go, that's what we've been trying to say without being able to formalize it. I mean, that's why you have a marketer. And so sometimes if you already got the job, you just got to do it and show it. And I've always seen people find value in that work, even if they don't have the concept of like, how could it be valuable to me at the outset?
Yeah. Wow. So well said. Because again, like all this stuff, I mean, it can be impactful. It is impactful. It will resonate. It will do all these things. Doesn't happen overnight. But one way to do it is, like you called out too, is just asking those questions with your team, with others, and then and asking other questions, and not to go crazy or in a big cycle here, but sometimes rephrasing those questions or asking questions about those questions. Because I think at the end of the
Right.
day, it's not necessarily about the result or the answer that you're looking for. It's about the types of questions that you're asking that will help reveal or give you clarity towards the result that you're looking to achieve. Because there's so many times when we're just looking at the bottom line, but that we forget that the bottom line can come in numerous different ways. We can't just see it as one single path because it never is that way, as though it might seem that way. Awesome, great points there. And what a way to conclude. But before we do, we covered lots of things today, like so much. This is a packed episode. I loved it. But in light of that, with all this, what are some like 3 tips, suggestions, whatever that you can call out to from our conversation that listeners could take away?
I'm probably going to shock you, but the number one thing, this is for indie developers, don't hire an agency. So when I say agency, what I mean is if your marketing budget is under $10 million, which I imagine for most listeners, it would be under $10 million, don't hire a big fancy like I need 5 people to figure this out for me. You don't need that because I've worked at places, where we would have like, it's a 2-month process to figure out the brand and you have multiple agencies doing all this stuff. You don't need that if your sales target is like, could we hope to sell 100,000 copies, right? So that doesn't mean you don't need help. Don't hire an agency. Look for an individual. There are lots of individual consultants out there that you can find that are just one person that can do this stuff for you in a week or two, actually, and get you where you need. It's not as involved, but don't invest. Don't listen to me and then this podcast and go like, oh my gosh. The first thing we need to do is find a brand agency. Those guys are the things that will drive you crazy about the stereotypical marketer. And I think that they're I would find them frustrating to spend that kind of money on them. You find an individual who knows how to do it and has a connection to like an understanding of how games are developed. That person can work quickly and be cost effective, and it can pay dividends. So that's one. Second is just, it takes practice, focus. Nobody's going to get it right, the brand right immediately, right? So always give feedback and just don't stop until you can explain the value of your game again in just a handful of words. And then be observant. This is both for developers and marketers, which is just, and not just even in games. So like what things do you remember? What catches your interest? I mean, I mentioned an Apple commercial from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Jesus. 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Was it for you? Hey, 1984, a long time ago.
I was 1 year old.
Yeah.
For anybody who cares.
But it's like, but why is that so memorable and so different? And so, you are a consumer. Everybody in America, certainly, and most of the world is a consumer of products, right? And what drives you to be interested in something, interested in a game, interested in a product? What are the things? And then just drill down and just understand it. And then just keep notes. If you use Miro, I find Miro is a really effective tool to just go, I saw some trailer, just grab the YouTube link, throw it on Miro, put some notes of like, this is why this is interesting me. Again, using LinkedIn, you see somebody post some marketing thing that they did, right? Why? You downloaded an indie game last week. First of all, how'd you hear about it? What made you think like, this is the game I'm going to spend $15 on this week, right? Like, what are the things that drove you to it? And then even you saw an ad or something, an article, you go to the storefront, right? What made you go from, okay, I got to the store, but now I'm actually going to make the purchase? Because that is another part of the marketing funnel, right? So what are they doing right? When do you go and go, I saw this ad, but then I went to Steam and I was like, this game's not really for me. What happened between that process, right? Because all of those things are free learnings about what to do. You just always have to be observant about what is happening and your own internal whys, and then know that you're going to have an audience that might be different than you. I mentioned I worked on social casino games. That is not my game at all. I'm not like a 50-plus-year-old woman, which is the large portion of that audience, right? But I have to understand what drives them. And so I have to take some of my understanding of what drives me to make an install or keep playing a game. And I have to put myself in the shoes of the core, the target audience, and understand that change. But just again, being observant is a free tool. It just requires your time and attention and just taking notes so that you can leverage it in the future.
Such great stuff there. I can't thank you enough to conclude with all that because, yeah, look, everything there. If you can start practicing those things, especially the last one, being observant, it can make a huge difference in everything that you're doing. So love those points. Hilary, I know we're at time here, but before we go, are there ways for people to connect with you? Do you have any links to share with us? Please drop them.
Yeah, I mean, one, as I mentioned, I'm always on LinkedIn and I'm actually pretty good. Again, I'm not salesy, but I talk to people who just like reach out and just want to have a conversation because I think it's just good to know people in the industry and hear what's going on with them. And you can always set up a meeting with me. Again, my consultancy is called Fitted Marketing. It's called Fitted because it is basically built to like adjust to your budget and your needs. But also I know lots of people, so I might not be right for you, but I promise you, if you want to spend a little time with me, I probably know somebody I can direct you to that might be able to help you. Or I'm just here to chat because I'm a chatty person. But we'll drop. I have a Calendly link that you can click and schedule time if you're interested, or just drop a note in LinkedIn. But always happy to chat.
Excellent. Well, Hilary, thank you so much. This was a really awesome conversation. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too. And everyone listening, I hope you had fun and got something out of it. I think it was super impactful. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your awesome knowledge with us.
Hey man, thanks. It was a lot of fun, and thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.